Hello, and welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steven Nemerovski, and I'm your host. We're going to make a little bit of history today. The Grassroots TV channel.
Where should I look?
Pardon?
Where should
You just look at me.
Okay, cool.
We have a very rude guest here, as you can tell right away. She's very picky. Anyway, we're going to make a bit of history today. Our Grassroots television station here in Aspen is going all HD, which of course is a problem for me because I already have a face for radio and I have no idea what this is going to be when you have me on HD. So we're going to test it and see how that goes. Maybe the last show ever done in HD on the station. And as always, this is a fun time of the year for us because it's the Aspen Ideas Festival, and we kidnap a lot of their great speakers and have them on guests as our show. And today's our first Ideas Festival show for this year. For those of you that have been fans of the show, all three of you, as you know, we've been spending a lot of time trying to study millennials and what effect millennials are going to have on the political system, what changes they're going to impose on it, where they're going to take that system. We're going to do a little bit of an international flavor today, and we're going to do a twist from India. Our guest today is Snigdha Poonam, and she's written a terrific book called Dreamers, where she's looked at the millennials. I don't know what they call millennials in India. She looked at the millennial generation in India and trying to predict the great change that they're going to make in their country. So I thought it'd be interesting, again, to have an international twist on this. And if you read the book, and I recommend it, it's a great read, you'll realize, again, the impact of technology and how interconnected this world is. So for those of you watching the show, it's imperative. You've got to understand what's going on in India and China and all these countries because they're affecting our world day to day. Snigdha is also a national affairs writer with the Hindustan Times. So with that, why don't we jump into the book? Welcome to Aspen.
Thank you.
How many hours did it take to get here?
32.
32. Hopefully the Aspen Ideas Festival will put you in first class.
We won't answer that.
We won't answer that. All right, so just by a little bit of way of background before we get to the book. India is the second largest country in the world, right? 1.2 something billion people.
Yes.
It's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
And within that context, how many are in this generation that you've been studying?
Well, so as you said yourself, India has 1.2 billion people, and half of those people are under the age of 35. That makes them even like a really large number of people. So we are talking of like 600 million people who are under the age of 35. It's the largest number of young people in any country in this world.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because China, for many, many years, had a program where they only were allowing one birth. So effectively, I assume at some point, India actually will pass China in population. And if nothing else, right now, this demographic of under 35, are you calling it?
Yes.
Is clearly
rising.
the biggest in the world.
Yes.
The other thing is there's been a shift in your country in terms of speaking English. And at some point, relatively soon, you will have more people speaking English in India than any other country in the world.
Yes. I mean, India is, like most Commonwealth nations, India has had a long history of speaking English. But I think with globalization and with all the other, large-scale global changes in the last 2 decades, English has become more and more important to get anywhere, to get a job, to go through airports and restaurants and everything. So that has been that has led to a really massive industry of English speaking, or how should I put it, the coaching of English speaking across India, which means that hundreds of millions of young Indians speak English today, and that number is going to explode over the next 5 or 10 years.
And they see this as an economic tool.
Yes.
Learning English for them is a step to becoming something next.
Yes.
Whether it introduces them to America or the world or the internet, however they see it. It's a
Totally.
door. It's a door to success.
It's a door to success and influence and status.
But historically, I take it, again, from reading your book, that Gandhi and some of the founders of the modern India saw that as a bit of a curse, too. They didn't necessarily want to go there.
Yes. Language is politics in India, not just English. We have dozens of languages, and each has its own sort of tough wars. And English is particularly tricky because of the history is nation with colonialism. So, on the one hand, it's a language that was left behind by the British, but it's also, in so many countries, in South Africa and Nigeria, it's also the language of aspiration and upward mobility and, as you said, success. And so that tension keeps, erupting in every sort of way all the time, and people make their way around it.
And the other, again, the background fact I want to talk about is to a certain extent, your country is going through a bit of a change in terms of its own politics too, right? Some of the establishment, if that's a word, we're kind of changing over. Now you have your Prime Minister Modi is kind of a fresher, different type of a face. So there's a
Yes.
political change undergoing in your country.
Yes. I mean, in America, you have white people or race. In India, we segment along religion and caste. What that means effectively is that for the higher caste Hindus to feel that India is their country, their land, and to demand that their rights be prioritized over every other minorities is, has become like a leading sort of like political force. So, and a force that has been legitimized by India's last government that came to power, the Bharatiya Janata Party's Hindu nationalist prime minister, and his government does validate that notion, and they sort of have empowered the believers of this notion to do what they like, to keep others in their place.
So you've written this great book. First of all, tell my viewers how to find your book.
It's coming out in North America from the Harvard University Press this August, and should be available in every major minor bookstore.
Okay, and again, the full title is Dreamers, How Young Indians Are Changing the World.
Yes.
Okay. So I suspected when I was going to start reading this book, how they're changing the world, there's going to be this kind of wonder story. And I was telling you before we got here, there's a little bit of scariness in there. But before we get to the scariness, tell me, what was the idea for the book? Just kind of wake up one morning and I want to write a book.
We were just talking about it, 1.2 billion people, half of those people are under 35. And if you're a journalist in India, every story that you write is taking you back to the same population. So, you're reporting on riots or elections or protests, anything at all, really, gender, and everything's like taking you back to the aspirations and the frustrations of young people who seem to be at the center of everything that makes news. And I had been doing that for several years, 5 or 6 years, and they kept telling me the same sort of things, this really exaggerated ideas that they had of what they wanted to be and what they wanted the country to be and how they wanted to influence where their country was going and where the world was going. And after some point I started thinking, but the realities were like totally not in proportion. India is going through a very challenging period of a total jobless economic growth. 1 million Indians enter the workforce every month, about 10,000 get jobs. And yet,
Wait. 1 million enter the workforce every month.
Yes.
And 10,000 get jobs.
Get jobs, and yet
that's a staggering
That is
statistic.
a staggering stat. And every third or fourth young Indian I would meet reporting my daily stories would tell me these things that they wanted to do, launch companies and be all over the world and be popular and successful and influential. And I was wondering, how would they do what they wanted to do? And if there are hundreds of millions of people who suddenly, I'll repeat a line from the book. What happens when 100 million people start dreaming big in a place where no one is prepared for it? Families, teachers, employers, governments. And that's the idea, that's the question that I wanted to answer with the book.
In fact, I think that's a theme throughout the book. There is a tension between these young people and their big ideas, and then to a certain extent having to convince their family of what these ideas are and where it's going to take them.
Yes.
So did you know there was going to be that kind of tension going in? You would have suspected that, I take it, given the country, the development of the country, and the way the family structure exists.
Yes, I don't think the family was a big challenge for any of them as much as the system. Everyone featured in the book struggles against a system, whatever that is, whether it's like influenced by gender or class or governance, but they're all like trying to break through.
So how do you even start a project like this? How do you figure out how you're going to attack 500-600 million people to get this story out?
That was the easiest part of it.
Really?
Because, it's amazing that India has so many young people, but also that so many of these young people think like that. So so as I said, I'd been talking to them for a few years, and they kept telling me these things about how they wanted to, like, become world famous and richest person in the world. Like, everything that they did had to be at the highest level of, like, standards. And so I just, like, started traveling and talking to people wherever I could, and really every second or third person I spoke to, I wanted to feature in the book. So it took me a long time and a lot of struggle to filter through and to select 5 or 6 people whose lives I wanted to follow for a year or 2 or 3.
And again, that's what you do in the book. You tell us the stories of, I don't know how many people I didn't count them, 5, 6, 8, 10 people.
Yes, and then a minor.
You talk about their journey.
Yes.
You work with them over a period of years. You interview them over a period of years.
Yes.
Now, up front in the book, you mentioned that most of the people you interviewed were male, not female. How did that come about?
I mean, India has more men than women. I think that's
Significantly more?
significantly more. So that's kind of well known. That was not the only reason, though. I mean, for a number of, like, journalistic reasons, it was easier for me. I mean, men are more mobile than women in India. So you literally see men everywhere, and you won't see women in the same way. So I'm saying that if you want to talk to men, you just have to, like, walk down a street, go to a coffee shop, go to a college, go anywhere the young people are going to be, and you will see young men, to a park or anywhere, really. But in this, like, you won't find young women in the same numbers. But even if you do, they aren't that likely to be able to, like, speak to you and to let you follow their lives for a year, that sort of stuff. So the agencies with their dad or their brother, or their husbands or something. So initially I did try to follow some of them, but then it's always, like, leading me back to these permissions from their families, that sort of stuff. But also there was a bigger reason, which is that I was talking to men and I was talking to women, and at some point I realized something that I didn't fully understand earlier, which is that ambition for men and women played out very differently in India. I mean, for women, it was a big deal to fight for the most basic of freedoms, to go to school, to leave their cities, to not get married early, or to follow careers after marriage. Whereas for men, these freedoms were already taken care of, so they could think of such things as, oh, I want to launch the biggest company in the world, or become the most, like, richest person in the world, that sort of thing. And it's that kind of, like, aggressive masculinity in what it means for the future of the country and the world that I became more obsessed with.
So I mentioned while we were getting prepared for the show, my wife and daughter and I traveled to India. It's a vast country.
Yes.
And we just barely scratched the surface in the north, and we never made it to the south. I'm just wondering, you have the names of towns you visit in here, but they don't mean anything to me. How much of a geographic distribution did you also cover in the country while you were doing these interviews? Were you mostly in one area, or were you fairly dispersed?
Very little, actually. I thought when I was beginning that there were 2 ways of doing such a book. Either you keep it wide, or you go in deep. So I could either, like, travel the length and breadth of the country, or I could just stick to one place and talk to the same 5 or 6 people. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wanted to do. So I went back to my own hometown, a small town in Central East India, and I thought that this is all I'm going to do. I'm just going to go deep. And, like, one place is not representative, but it's also not representative. So that's what I wanted to do. So half of the book's, like, characters are from the same town or, like, around it. But then I got a little bored a year into the project, and I started traveling a little bit outside of that, and I was reporting for newspapers and magazines, and as I said, meeting the same kind of people everywhere. So then I expanded the pool to 7 people in 3 or 4 places.
So would you do maybe a sequel, or do you think that area is significantly representative of the country? You wouldn't have to do that, or should you pick out another part of the country? If we're in the United States,
Yes.
and I did my book in New York only, I would think another book in California only would be very different. The East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, totally different mindsets, totally different attitudes.
Totally, and it's the same of India. In fact, you travel 15 miles and it's a different country. There are so many divisions of, like, language and food and culture and religion. But I would. I wasn't concerned about the place. It's a peculiar moment in India's story where no matter where you go, especially young people are going to tell you the same things to some extent.
So what do my viewers want to know about these characters in your book? What are the lessons you want to teach? I say, our show's going international today. We want to stay in your country. If you have to condense this into like a message or two, what's the main takeaway?
Right. I said initially that the answer that I was like the question that I was trying to answer through the book is, what happens when 100 billion young people start dreaming in a place where no one's prepared for it? And the answer that I found was that they take the future in their own hands. They realize that they are completely on their own, so they build a world in which they can be what they want to be, in which how well you do depends on how badly you want to do well. So whether whatever your path to success is a good one, a bad one, a moral one or an immoral one, doesn't matter. They want success anyway, and once they have achieved it, they will, they will then want to decide how the country is run or the world is run. And that was, in my experience, how many of these stories ended. I mean, of course, not all of these dreams gets fulfilled. I mean, a lot of them fail, and it is also the failure of these dreams and how they were leading to social unrest across India, and how, there were same people were their vision of how the world should be run was like more and more what we're already seeing in America or Britain, and as you said in the beginning, it was terrifying.
Yeah, it almost seems as though the system stacked against them. Many of your stories, that people had to literally pay bribes.
Yes.
All the way through to get to somewhere.
Yes.
And it was almost expected in many cases. In other words, a bribe to get an introduction to someone, a bribe to get a job interview, a bribe to get out of a job interview. Is it that pervasive that there's this layer of, maybe bribe is a little too strong of a word, inducement.
Yes.
Is it that pervasive? But at the same time, people know how to navigate this because they know how the system works.
Well, corruption has been a part of the Indian daily life for I don't even know how long, but what's made it more visible is the fact that for this generation of Indians, there are so few legit means to realizing their dreams that they don't even think twice about doing something that may qualify as immoral or even like illegal. So in large parts of every big Indian city, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Ahmedabad, large parts of these cities are engaged in building of these like armies of scammers who make their living by cheating strangers in India and all over the world. And you have thousands of like young people in Mumbai and Delhi and Kolkata impersonating loan agents and tax agents and Microsoft executives and Apple executives and cut rate Viagra manufacturers. I mean, scamming English-speaking foreigners across the world. And when you talk to them, when you ask them why they do what they do, the reasons are compelling. I mean, from saying that, Americans losing $300 or $400 don't realize that on the other end of the line sits someone who's like earning just 30,000 rupees for a month of doing the stalking. Or they will say, no job that gives you a salary can be bad. So that's...
Well, it's a survival.
It's survival.
It's survival. So even though you introduced mostly men, I found the most interesting character in the book to be a young woman. Is it Rika?
Richa Singh.
Richa Singh. And she also reflects a very strong political knowledge of your young population too. So just give me a little bit of insight into her, what her story is.
I mean, her story to me represented a fight against all of this like aggressive masculinity that was just like the justification for the rise of like religious populism in India. So she stands against all of that, and in not just like saying that, but in by actually trying to win political power, which is in her world and in her mind the biggest kind of validation for her politics. So she fights a very difficult, very manly election in a small town in North India. And
for the benefit of viewers, because I don't know, they don't know where you're taking this. She's actually fighting to become basically the head of her college.
Yes, she's fighting to become the president of the Students' Union.
She's not even representing the population. It's within the college, but it's a very hard-fought
It's a very
contest.
hard-fought election, and it represents the wider political currents across India. So she's fighting to become the president of the Students' Union of the Allahabad University, but that fight is not easy. I mean, to fight it, the men start with like hiring bouncers and, buying guns and bribing their way through the city and the college and everything. And so she has to like fight against that political culture too, to fight a clean election, to fight an election based on the rights of the others, the Muslims and the lower caste students and women, and to fight for all of these freedoms that are not sexy or popular. And the challenges that she faces along the way are staggering. It still blows my mind away, from clear rape threats to violent sort of physical battles. And but the best part is that she wins, and it's one of the most dramatic stories in the book. But
It's very compelling.
But it's also the most like telling of really what the battle is amongst the young people. I mean, not the young people against the system, but amongst young people. There are, not every young Indian is the same, and that's what it shows.
So we're going to be running out of time here. Mr. John's giving me the signal. But time for one kind of last question here. We're talking, and everybody's in America, I think, is worried about China from an economic perspective, the power of China, where China's going. One of my takeaways here is that India's going to be in this game too. So give me something that could happen to put India way into the game, and give me something that could happen that would keep India from ever getting into the game.
Well, India is interesting in the way that China is no longer is that the potential of its demographic dividend, of its youth bulge, has not yet been unleashed. So we don't know what can happen, but we know that we don't know what will happen, but we know that what can happen, it's huge, whether in a good way or in a bad way. So we've been talking about this. So if you give these like millions of hundreds of millions of young people who are more like diverse than their counterparts in China, they're more energetic, they're more fierce and hungrier. And if you give them the right kind of opportunities to realize their potential, India can become, as they have been dreaming, the next superpower. And there can be a different scenario in which you just like keep feeding them with empty promises, but do not give them any opportunities to make those true. And you will see on a wider scale what's already been happening in India with like protests and riots and violent expressions of that angry masculinity all over the place.
Well, thank you for your time. Again, I enjoyed reading your book, and again for the viewers, it's Dreamers: How Young Indians Are Changing the World. I recommend it to you because again, you want to know what's going on in the rest of the world, and I don't think in our country we hear about India enough. I traveled there. It's a fascinating country. It's a vibrant country. And obviously you can't do India justice in just 25 minutes. But you could do India some justice by reading Snigdha's book, and I recommend it to you.
Thank you, Stephen.
As always, we try to find solutions on this show, and I think one of the solutions is to read this book and, if nothing else, learn about the dynamic, what's going on there, and how it could affect our country, because we're in a competitive world, and the internet has brought us all together, and this book is just a small slice of what that world is going to be about. Remember, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I hope you enjoyed today's show. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.